A very warm welcome to Moments of Grace. This our 17th episode. This month we have a conversation with Dean Michael Wright and our new Canon Organist, Nicholas Quardokus. Dean Michael.
Well, welcome to our podcast, and a special welcome to Nick Quardokus, who is, as Father Bryce noted, our new Canon Organist and Director of Music. We're thrilled that Nick has come among us. Maybe just to introduce yourself to the Grace family, Nick, tell us a little bit about where you've come from and why you've ended up in this crazy ministry known as organist and the Director of Music.
Well, certainly crazy. Well, thank you very much, Father Michael. It's my absolute honor to be a part of the team here at Grace Church Cathedral. My love for church music really started out as a child. I grew up not as an Episcopalian, but in a liturgical church. And so very much the organ was very much a part of my daily life. I went to a parochial school, so there was chapel, there was church every week. We grew up singing. My parents weren't musicians, but music was very much a part of the household and my grandparents' household. And so I grew up in that environment, and I think I got the bug from that very early age. Went on, did studies, formal training in sacred music at Indiana University and at Yale University. And along the way, found the Episcopal Church through internships at Indiana first and then at Yale. And then went on to St. Paul's K Street in Washington, D.C., did a year of internship, and then on to St. Thomas Church, Fifth Avenue, where I did 2 years as their assistant organist.
Well, that's incredible in terms of the different places you've named. I am, as you know, a great fan of hymnody, and what I notice in your hymn playing is that you're very passionate about hymnody, and it's always a joy to read the text and feel the organ playing is actually mimicking or telling us something about that text. And there are a number of occasions where I've heard you play where there's a sense of oneness between text and tune. That doesn't always happen. Did you learn that growing up? Did you have mentors? How did you kind of put together the whole word and melody, that whole marriage that works so well?
Well, I think it goes back to my very first organ lesson. I can remember this very fondly, where very much my mentor, who happened to be my third grade teacher when I was growing up through school, and by the time I got to 8th grade, he became my first organ teacher, and he was the parish organist, and he said, Nick, it's always about the text. And that was our first lesson as an 8th grader, and I was ready to play hymns and get to know the music and all this sort of thing, and he just kind of took a step back and said, no, Nick, this is about the text. So everything you do revolves around the text, whether it be your choices of the sounds that you use or the choices of the alternate harmonies that you use. That's how it all kind of comes together, is with that text, and that's kind of been with me this entire time. And I've been very fortunate to learn different ways to paint text along the way, but I'm always very passionate that hymns are among the most important, if not the single most important musical piece of our liturgy. It's not choral anthems, it's congregational hymnody. And that might be part of my background growing up in a Protestant liturgical background, but I still feel very strongly about that.
Well, that's interesting, because I would say at the core of Grace's identity over many decades, that whole tradition of choral singing of hymns is at the heart of the identity of this place. And it certainly drew me to it at the beginning. Yes, it has a great choral singing tradition, but it's got an even more glorious hymn singing tradition. It's interesting, you talk about the tune must include thoughts for the text. When I'm writing a hymn, it's hard to write it without thinking about the tune that it'll go with. You really can't separate the two. If it was simply the text, it would be a piece of poetry. Because it's a hymn, you can't really picture it being without the appropriate tune. So I applaud you for that, and I think it's something that if we could recover more of that, the church would be healthier for it. Well, in terms of the choral tradition, you must have a great love of that. And here at Grace, you've got responsibility for children as well as for adult choirs. Tell us some of what excites you about the choral part of the choir repertoire, the anthems, the liturgical settings. What excites you about that?
Well, I would say, at least here at Grace, the really exciting part is to be able to make great music with a very committed group of individuals that are a part of the St. Gregory Choir, that are a part of the parish choir, and that very much are increasingly a part of the St. Nicholas choristers. And so, as an organist, most of the time we sit in a practice room or in a church on our own and practice for several hours a day and this and that. But the exciting thing about the choral repertoire is that it's a living, breathing music with other human beings that sometimes organists are not as accustomed to engaging with. And to me, that's extremely exciting, and I'm looking forward to, in the months and years to come at Grace, to expanding a repertoire based on the English cathedral tradition that we all know and love, and continuing to include expressions by underrepresented composers, by American composers, choral pieces based on spirituals or American folk tunes. I think the possibilities are endless, and I look forward to exploring them with the whole Grace Church Cathedral community.
Well, I love this balance that you're bringing, both of the expressed or explored tradition, but also with newer music, because I think the problem we sometimes have with tradition, we think tradition is all about older music. Tradition is about every generation adding its particular gift. So our hope will be we'll celebrate all that we've been, for sure, but there's so much that has been written. I think about hymnody in the last, in the 20th century. A lot of our most favorite hymns that we talk about as treasures were actually written in the second half of the 20th century, and so they're not really that old, but now we consider them almost folklore in our tradition. So I love this idea that tradition is about history, but it's also about solidifying and making tradition by what we're contributing at this point in our life. So, are there some examples of that you would celebrate in your own experience?
Well, I think that there are a lot of great things that are coming out of the 21st century. Believe it or not, we're already, a fifth of a way, nearly a quarter of a way through the 21st century. And unfortunately, many of our music lists that you would look at a church or a cathedral very much gravitate towards music that's 20th century and before. And so in that way, I'm very much looking forward to finding music of the 21st century. But that has its own challenges in that we have the advantage of much of the old music is tried and true. We know the favorites, we know what's great, and we know what isn't great. And so when we come to the 21st century, it really takes a lot of grappling and really doing your homework and experimenting. So I'm looking forward to engaging with all of the players here at Grace Church, including the clergy and the choir, with discovering these new pieces that can become a part of the heart of our repertoire. So.
Well, I think, well said. In terms of the Anglican heritage, our Episcopal Church, we've always said that we were both and. We were not either or. One of the things I celebrate about Grace is that we are both and. We want to celebrate what's worked before, and we want to contribute in our own day with traditions that those who come after us are going to celebrate as our great gift. I've often said that Episcopalians don't have a problem with change. Their struggle is with loss. If we're going to change and also carry with us what we've done before, people are going to be all right with that. The problem has been when we have to choose either the old or the new and not make room for the other. That limits what we can do liturgically. And so what we want to do as a church is celebrate just what you said, the best of our tradition, and in our own way, make a contribution to that tradition. I guess the best illustration I have for that is if you go to Westminster Abbey, this old historic church in England, the Royal Church, at the very front of it are statues of 20th century martyrs. So you don't look at that church and say, oh, it's an old building and it's all about tradition. You suddenly see 20th century figures on it and you go, oh, part of the tradition is keeping the tradition from before and then augmenting it with our own experience. I think what you're attempting to do here and already having success in doing is bringing both of those together. Maybe give us a last word before we close off this podcast about music and what we can look forward to your time at Grace.
Well, building on what you just said, I think that just being able to explore the full gamut of all that there is to offer, and not just in the English cathedral background, but in the American expression, in the continental European expression. And it's my hope that children's music will also be an even greater part of our identity here at the cathedral. And I look forward to nurturing the St. Nicholas Chorister program and being very much supportive of that, because much of my past has been with choristers at St. Thomas Church, at St. Paul's, K Street, and in Trinity New Haven. We're all very strong chorister programs, and that's something that I'm very passionate about, that we will be together learning, and I'll be able to have a bit of teaching together, you all teaching me teaching you. I look forward to very much a two-way street in everything that we do together in the next several years to come.
Well said, and thank you for this time. It's a delight to have you in our midst, and I think wonderful to end with the ministry of children, because if we are heading towards the future in any way, that's a tradition we've got to nurture right now so that we have lots to celebrate in the years to come. With that, I'll simply conclude this podcast and remind you that we'll be doing this again before very long as we move on next month to our next podcast. Thanks for being with us. Bye for now.